These kids nowadays, like Chuck, they just don't get anything.
Yeah, my attention span. Oh, wait a minute. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 110 of the Freelancer Show. This week on our panel we have Reuven Lerner.
Hi everyone.
Curtis McHale.
G'day.
Jeff Schoolcraft.
What's up?
Mandy Moore.
Hello.
I'm Charles Maxwood from devchat.tv. We're going to talk about getting started with freelancing. We haven't talked about this in a while, and Reuven got a question about it. So, Reuven, do you want to fill us in a little bit about what they were asking about?
Sure. So someone contacted me about the fact that I'm a U.S. citizen doing consulting abroad outside the U.S., and we can talk about that on another show. And then after a bit of an exchange, he said, oh, and by the way, in addition to thinking about moving abroad and doing consulting, I would be starting consulting. And how do I break into it, since a lot of your shows have to do with experienced people? And I want to know, how do I start off? What are my first steps?
Interesting. So do we want to talk about experience level needed, or do we want to just go directly at how do you get started freelancing?
Well, is there a particular experience level you need? I'm not convinced that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not so much either.
Well, you need to be able to turn on your computer, though, right? There's a very low baseline.
I was going to say, does that count?
Something there, Curtis.
I went from being a waitress to a freelancer just like that, so it's pretty easy.
Yeah, all you have to do is put up a sign, right? I'm a freelancer. I declare to be a freelancer. Not quite?
Nah.
You can, but
you can try that.
Well, right.
Right, so you quit your job. No, it's...
Well, go part-time first. Do half and half.
I got laid off. I mean, that's more or less how I got going. I told my wife I was going freelance, and she freaked out. It's definitely an interesting thing. I don't know that you have to be an expert in order to be a freelancer. I definitely agree with you guys. I kind of want to expound on that a little bit. If you can solve the customer's problem, then why the heck not?
If you can provide value, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be charging what the higher end guys are, but you can still live on what you're charging. If you can't, then you probably ought to do it.
Right. Well, freelancing is just like a technical legal definition. It means you're in business for yourself. And obviously a lot of things come with that. But you can be a freelancer and work at the same sort of job, or even the same job as you were as a full-time employee, 40 hours a week, if you really want to. And there are definitely people who do that for a variety of reasons. But freelancer can also mean something a little higher level, or a lot higher level, where you come in and you're not just another body doing software development or some other task, but you're giving them, as Chris said, additional value. You're really helping their business push ahead. And that's, I think, what we all aim to do more of, both because I find it more interesting, and quite frankly, it also pays better.
Yeah, when you're just starting, it's hard to make that transition, though, right? Like, I know when I just started, I was simply putting up websites for people. I was solving the problem that they didn't have a website, and now they had one. There was no deeper business discussion like I do now, right? Where I talk about, we can save this much employee time, and we can save all these other things. So when you're starting out, it's hard to even get to that next step because you're still learning how to do the technical aspects of your job.
Right, because freelancing is both doing, again, if you're in the technical industry, you're doing the technical stuff. So you're doing development, system administration, that sort of stuff. Plus, you're learning how to run your own business. And you need to do both of them well in order to succeed. And so I can easily imagine it's easier, I guess, just by definition, to continue doing what you were doing professionally, but on a freelancing basis, learn the ropes on the business side, and then slowly but surely crank up your experience level and the value you offer on the technical side as well.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, or the hardest type of person is one who's a technician who can really dig deep into the, we normally talk to coders, to the code or to the design, and to move from a technician to step back and be a manager or an entrepreneur and really to step back to running the business is the hardest part. Even at a one person shop level, right? Not even talking about looking at employees or looking at long-term vision, but being able to step out of going into mole mode where you don't talk to the client for 5 days and say, what do you mean you're annoyed because you haven't heard from me? I was working. Not that they have any idea that you were.
What did you call that? Mole mode?
Mole mode. That would be Von Glitchka, who's an illustrator that I started using that years ago for.
I like that term a lot. And I definitely made mistakes like that. I still make it on occasion, but way, way less than when I first started off. I remember I had a client within my first year or two of starting off where I thought everything was just going great. And I spoke to him after about a month or two, And after putting up the website and all the application was up, and I said, so everything's great, right? And he said, what do you mean great? We're incredibly upset with you. And I was confused by this. And he said, you can't just set up the software and expect me to know what to do. You have to call me. You have to contact me. And since then, I've been sure to contact people all the time. And what do you know? It works really well.
Yeah, that's part of even my long-term marketing, right? Get in touch with a client a month later. How's the site going? Are you still happy with it? Is there any issues you're having, right? I find 90% of the time for me with WordPress, the issue is very simple and I can point them to a video tutorial to fix it. But then it reinitiates the conversation every few months. And often there's even work later after a couple conversations again.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about finding that first client? I know that in general, a lot of folks say, well, my first client was my last employer. But what if you're not in a position to do that? You know, they laid you off or fired you, or, you know, you left terms that weren't the greatest.
Not all work online from home deals are scams.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I found my first client just because it got outsourced to Indeed.com. It seemed too good to be true. It said virtual assistant. I'm looking for somebody to answer emails and do a couple of secretarial things. And I'm like, that's easy, but that seems too good to be true. But I answered the ad and set up a Skype meeting, and it worked out in my favor. And then from there, I, started doing more and more, getting more hours. Went from like 2 hours a week to 4 or to 6, and then he was impressed with my work, so he kind of introduced me into the software developer community, and the rest is history.
Yeah, for me, when I really decided I wanted to go freelance, I started making 10 cold calls, cold emails, contacts a day, and I kept going until I had 10. For a while, I used Jeff's, I'm forgetting on it, the lead email that he sent.
Freelance funnel?
Yep, that's it. I use that a lot. And if I didn't find 10 good ones on that, I'd start hitting the job boards. I'd start calling local people. And I didn't love cold calling, but that's what you got to do to get out there, right? So it was a lot of work for me to get out there. I did not have a good contact that I could go back to at all.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my first freelance gig, I actually went to lunch with a bunch of guys who are local here. And the rumor was going around that one of the companies out here was hiring. And so we all applied, and it turned out what they meant by hiring was that they were looking for a freelancer to help them on one of their projects. And so that worked out, the networking there. Another thing that worked out for me is, and your mileage may vary here, but I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, get in touch with this recruiter that he knew, and the recruiter had a contract gig that he was trying to fill. And so I worked that one for like a year, and that was only 10 hours a week, but it was still something. And then another one came out of the woodwork. I had done a video series on how to build a Twitter clone. Actually, I take it back. I hadn't done it, but it was on my site. And so somebody contacted me about that and said, I want something like that. So, I mean, there are a whole bunch of different ways to do it. If you can build a platform before you go freelance, it's probably a good idea. But if you don't have time, or you just can't take another day at that job, then, do what you got to do. But, I think it's a really good idea to build a network and build a platform before you go so that you have people to go to ask.
Well, and finding a bigger agency, right, or a bigger, like a freelancer like myself who may not take smaller projects and saying, hey, here's some stuff about me. I do know what I'm doing in this field, but I'm not taking, I'm taking smaller projects. And my first year was also helped made by a company called Brave New Code that does WP Touch Pro, and they were moving into their product full time, and they just started sending me a lot of their leads. And they get Christmas presents every year, because I would not have made it, or barely have made it, my first year without all the leads that they sent me for projects they just weren't taking anymore.
I think some of you guys are saying things which are very useful to hear also, in that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I mean, in my case, it was. In my case, I did what I think Chuck said, which is I left a job, and that job turned out to be my first freelancing client. And they were a great, great client for 4 years. And I still have good relationships with the people I worked with there. But I think for many people, it's probably smarter and easier to start ramping it up little by little, if you can, maybe as a part-time thing in addition to your full-time job, to start getting your name out there and just experience it. In general, I think if you can do a few projects just on an hourly basis to get your feet wet, and slowly but surely get into it, I think that could be useful and good.
that's certainly where I started. I got to a point where I had the savings my wife and I decided was appropriate, and I had to quit getting new work or quit my job, and we decided my job. And that's when I really kicked the contacting into overdrive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Curtis, you say that you were doing cold calls. I cold calls and cold emails. I think I did that many years ago, and I found it somewhere between ineffective and frustrating, maybe even both. So who did you contact? Was it just people locally in your area, or were you
I looked up the Chamber of Commerce site locally, was one of my ones, and I just started a day and went through till I had 10 every day. And there's tons in there when we got into the project. I was like, this was a terrible project, but I learned a lot and I fed my family. So those are both good things, right? They're bad projects maybe, but I fed my family, which is my top priority. And then I learned a lot about doing it, and it kept me going so that I could take the good projects, because I was jumping between good projects that were being referred to me from Brave New Code, and they were quite well-paying clients. Even now, well-paying clients, some have stuck with me through all my rate increases, but it gave me the other fill-in that I needed to actually have a viable business.
Have any of you found clients or early clients or even later down the road clients from user group meetings?
I have, not early on, but I have.
See, I would say sort of, because I met the guys at Brave New Code through conferences and stuff, right? And they got to know that the things I didn't know, I knew the right questions to ask, is what they told me. So they felt confident that I could ask the right questions and still answer it, even if I didn't know the answer right off the top of my head.
Yeah, a lot of the local businesses here, if they are plugged into the Ruby community, they know who I am. And so I've gotten some business that way, where somebody referred, or in one case, one of the bigger bookstores that's local here called Deseret Book, they had some work that they needed done. So they just came over and that was pretty much that. It, wasn't a ton of work, but it was good work. So
yeah, I've gotten all my work through referrals.
Yeah, referrals can work well. I mean, when I first started off and I was talking, there was this graphic design agency that I did a little bit of work for, not a lot. And they got me into a company also where they were doing some work and they needed some programming help. And they started offering to refer me to people, and they said, and our fee for doing this is, and that's when I said, oh, I'm really not interested in that. And, years down the road, I'm saying, well, that was probably the right decision. But back then, I really didn't have that many clients. So perhaps that would have been a reasonable trade-off to sort of ramp up faster. But at that point, I was single. I had the big client in America, my former employer. And so I didn't feel the squeeze that I absolutely positively needed to take everything that came my way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm really interested, and I know this is another email that the same person sent you, but since you're outside the U.S., does that affect the way that you do things?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I have to convince people that, yes, I'm in Israel, but I'm actually from the U.S. I grew up there, went to high school and college there. And I really try to emphasize that because people have been burned by doing outsourcing to various countries, and they're just sort of nervous. Not to paint with too broad a brush, although this will be, but I find that most Americans calling outside the U.S., it's like trying to call the moon. They just have no idea how to do it. And so, even I love them dearly, but even my parents said at some point, what is that plus before your phone number? And having to explain to them, oh, that's the international area code, or the country code. And people outside the U.S. just sort of know this instinctively. So the fact that I then say to them, listen, I have Skype, I have a U.S. phone number that rings on my computer. Now, the number of clients who have actually called me on my U.S. number is zero. Literally zero in the 7 or 8 years I've had that phone number. But being able to tell them watch this, everyone who listens to the show is now going to call me, right? But basically, having that phone number definitely reassures them. And so trying to explain to them, yes, I'm American, yes, I know your business norms, yes, I know your language fluently, I think helps to calm them down. There are issues with time zones, but usually we get around that by me explaining that I don't sleep that much and I'm up at all sorts of hours, so it works out okay. And then the big sticking point is how do they pay, where they're always very nervous about that. And for me, for years, the easiest thing has been just stick a $1 check in the mail and send it to me, and I can deal with it on my end.
That makes sense. I want to kind of ask some of the common questions that I get from people who are looking at going freelance and just see what your answers are. I mean, I've given a talk on this like 3 or 4 times now in the local community, and so I kind of have things that I just say as part of the deal, but I'm kind of curious to see what your take on things are. So one of the questions I get is, isn't that risky? Isn't it risky to go out on your own as opposed to have an employer that just takes care of everything for you?
One employer means one person fires you and you have no job, right? Typically clients mean you have lots of Like one person fires you and you've got 3 other people still paying you for something.
I agree completely. I mean, not necessarily at the beginning when you're starting off freelancing, but now every so often I'll have a client say to me, wouldn't you like to work for me full time? And I think to myself, oh my God, get a paycheck from just one person. But what happens if it doesn't work out? So I definitely like, spreading my bets, as it were.
I tend to disagree a little bit, but it depends on the industry you're in. And what I mean by that is, for most people that I know that do what I do, it's not very hard to find a job. Everybody's looking. You go to the user group meetups and everybody's, hi, I work for such and I do such and such there, and we're hiring. And the next person stands up, I work for another company and I do, something similar, and we're hiring. And so for me, the risk is that I'm going to have to fall back to a full-time job. Not necessarily that, if somebody fires me, if I had a full-time job, I just take a couple days off and then go get another job. I know that's not that way in all industries for all people, but, at least in the programming and in the Ruby and Ruby on Rails arenas, there's plenty of work out there. And so,
yeah, it's the same for me. I think it's the same in a lot of the web field, like people doing design, and like I have no trouble finding work, really. I have no work when I say no, and usually not because there's not lots of people who want to work with me.
Right. And so, so that's the risk for me is, I'll have to go have a full-time job and I'll lose all of the freedom and flexibility that I have.
Yeah, that's pretty much the worst case scenario for me as well. Freedom and flexibility. I go back to waitressing. Yay.
But I would get paid well in a full-time job, so it really isn't, the risk isn't there for me. So the risk for me is risking my my control over my time and my lifestyle and things like that is what's at risk if I don't find work.
Right. Every so often I've thought to myself, oh boy, I'm having a slow period. What am I going to do? And certainly I've started to take steps to make sure that the slow periods either don't exist or they disappear completely. But almost always, I would say no, always, when I've started to have a slow period and I start to have those worries, I get a call from someone who saw me at a conference, read one of my articles, knew me somehow, just heard about me, and it starts to crank up again. And then I'm overwhelmed with work. So I have to sort of remember that during the downtimes, but it's generally true. And it's because I've hedged my bets and have lots of tentacles in lots of different communities and different technologies, and people have heard from me from different places. But again, I'm not sure. It's a little different if you're starting off and you don't have a reputation, you don't have these people who know you, you're just, let's say you're a software developer and you're even an excellent software developer, taking that plunge and saying, I'm going to give up that full-time job and the security, and there is some security in there, a fair amount, and go and start this whole new business practice that can be scary and there is risk involved. So I think, number one, doing it, as we said before, little by little is probably a good idea. And number two, having some cash on the side saved up so that you can get through that initial period is probably a good idea.
To me, the most important thing is if you're going to go for it, you have to give 150%. You can't just half-ass anything. You need to go in, give everything 150%, and build that solid reputation, because people are going to want to work with you. If they hear good things about you and you have a good work ethic and you can communicate with people and you are capable of producing great results, then you're golden.
Yeah, that's so true. And if you're kind of dipping your toe in the water, there is a big difference between doing it on the side and moonlighting and being in it full time, where it's your sole source of income is working for clients.
That's part of it. Commitment for sure. If it's on the side and it's a few hours a week or something, it's a whole lot easier to let that slide versus this is whether or not family's going to get fed or not. If you take on things, and then you're going to be into bigger projects too. You're not going to want to grab a 4-hour a week project if that's, well, maybe you do if it's the only thing that comes along. But you're going to be looking for bigger things because you have a much bigger pot to fill than just a few things on the side.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm kind of curious about how now that you've been doing it for a while, how you find clients. So is it just people call you up because you got stuff out there, or is it mostly referrals?
It's a combination for me. I would say about half to 2/3, maybe even more, of my clients reach out to me. And one of the best things I've done is speak at conferences. And I've managed to get myself invited to speak at all sorts of conferences. And what I typically say is within 6 months, and yes, it can take up to that time, 6 months of speaking at a conference, someone will call me and say, hey, I saw you speak at that conference. I really like you to help me out. And it can be a one-day gig, but it can also be an ongoing one. It totally depends. So having people contact me is certainly nice and easy, although it's obviously also somewhat unpredictable. So I look every so often, in various places online. And we've got a Facebook group for Ruby on Rails in Israel. Sometimes companies are looking for people and for help. Sometimes I look at online job listings, and I'll contact people. And there I know it's much more of a crapshoot. But when it works, it can work very well.
It's about the same. I think about half my work comes from referrals or the network I have created, and the other part gets filled in by just stuff that I see through looking at way too many things online that seems interesting, and I'll shoot them an email and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, that's where my stuff comes from.
Yeah, I'm 100% referrals, or people have heard of me and my work.
I'm kind of in the place where about half of the work just comes to me one way or the other. So yeah, I spoke at a conference, or I did a video online or something like that. And the other half of the work I get is, me going out and actually talking to people and working my network and things like that, working mailing lists, stuff like that, where I'm kind of actively looking for stuff. Or I'll go on the podcast and say, hey, I'm between contracts, and then I have people come and ask me to do work for them.
So what mailing lists have been most effective for you, Chuck?
The Utah Ruby Users Group has been pretty effective. I'm actually working on a more involved marketing funnel where I have my own lists related to the podcasts and other things that I do, and working that out so that, I can bring people in to either purchase products or work things out so that they'll hire me. But yeah, just being active in communities has really worked out.
I found, unfortunately, at least in Israel, that in many cases when companies are looking for developers, and especially in something like Ruby, where, I don't know, my impression is that it's pretty hard to find people, or at least good people. So they'll say, oh, we really, really need a developer. And I'll contact them. They'll say, oh, well, not a freelancer. Don't be silly. So much so that we actually split up. There's a Facebook group for Rails in Israel, and it was split then into two different groups. One for regular developers where people can post job postings, and another one for freelancers, because the freelancers were, I guess, tired of getting this sort of response. I did not set up the group. I was just told about it and joined it. And I'm not quite sure how these companies then deal with the harsh reality, which is there aren't any Ruby developers to be had. But I've now just got a thick skin on that. And it totally doesn't bother me when someone says we'd prefer to keep the knowledge in-house. We want internal design developers. We don't want to pay freelance rates. I say, okay, good luck with your project. And if you ever need help, let me know. And sometimes, maybe 20% of the time, they actually contact me 6 months later and say, we actually could use some more help, or maybe you could train our people or go over what they're doing, because we're not able to find people so easily. And I think to myself, I know. I knew that before, but sure.
Yeah, I've had that work out that way too, where I'm basically tell them, okay, well, if you need somebody to backfill, until you get somebody in there, let me know. And what usually winds up happening in my case is they have some conference coming up, or they've got some other event that they want to be ready for, and they still haven't found that person. And so it's some external event for them that triggers them to go, hey, we just need to get this done, and, our preference for in-house people just isn't working for us.
I should add, by the way, that, it's really useful to be nice. And it's nice to be nice in general, but I found it to be a very useful business tactic, even when people, or strategy, I guess, even when people are really ridiculous and have all sorts of crazy demands, saying to them, you have crazy demands and you're a jerk to boot, will never help, because you never know who people are going to talk to. So keep the anger inside and be nicey to them and wish them luck with their project, because you never know what it can lead to in terms of a referral.
Agreed, 100%. I have had people contact me and ask me what my rate is, ask me, can I, help them? And then they'll be like, oh, well, that's a little bit higher than I expected, which, a side note, also don't underestimate yourself, because I found out that I was severely undercharging people, like really, really undercharging people, which, do your research. and know what, you're capable of, and make sure you know what the median income bracket is, and then stick to that, because 10 to 1, those people will come back to you because they'll realize, well, I do need this person, and so that's how you build your reputation.
We kind of moved into rates, and I definitely agree. My initial rate when I went freelance, my first client, I charged $65 an hour on my first gig in Rails, and I wound up in this group of guys. Jeff was in there, Eric was in there, a few other folks were in there, and I started chatting with them, and they're, I'm all excited. I got my first gig, and they're like, well, what are you charging? And I kind of hemmed and hawed and then told them what I was charging, and they were like, dude, you have to charge more. And yeah, my next gig was almost double that because I realized that the value was there. So definitely figure that out, figure out where you need to be. What I tell people usually is, first off, go talk to other freelancers who do what you do if you can find them, and find out what they're charging. I mean, even if you don't feel like you're at their level or whatever, that at least gives you a starting point and you can kind of adjust from there. And then the other thing I tell them, and I think it was Freelance Switch used to have like a rate calculator. I haven't been able to find it recently.
No, it's gone.
So I kind of did my own napkin math. I'm going to put it in the show notes. But basically, if you're accustomed to getting $6,000 a month, and you figure in self-employment tax, which in the U.S. is 15.3%, that gets you just above $7,000. My health insurance is $900 a month, so that gets you almost to $8,000. Figure in income tax, which is going to be somewhere between probably 10 to 15% and 25 to 30% in the U.S. So I just, was a little conservative there and said 20%. That gets you to almost $10,000 a month. If you want to take 4 weeks off during the year, then you've got to make that up during every month that you work. And so that adds another $800 a month. And then if you divide that by 4 to get per week, and then you figure out that you're going to work about 30 hours per week, it comes out to about $90 an hour. And I ran through that kind of fast. If you want to look at the math, you can just go look at the show notes. But basically, so if you want to maintain a lifestyle where you were bringing home $6,000 a month, you've got to turn around and charge $90 an hour. So, you can do your own back of the napkin math to figure out how much you need to make, but you got to charge enough to live on. And if you're making the transition, going to a lower effective yearly salary is sometimes kind of hard. So I just want to throw that out there, talk to somebody and find out what it costs to be freelance.
I was going to say even an easier but probably less accurate sort of where the hell should I be money-wise is take the annual salary you'd think you'd get at a 9-to-5 job and divide it by 1,000, and that's close to an hourly. So if you're targeting like a $75,000 an hour job, it's about $75 an hour rate when you go through all the other math. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's close.
I think that's reasonably close to where this other math came out, and it's really interesting to figure out that your employer is probably paying a lot of that you don't even think about on top of your salary.
Oh yeah, for sure.
My first job, I guess, both when I was in college and then out of college, was at HP in the U.S. And they put us through an orientation for a few days. And part of that was learning the HP way, which back, I guess, 50, 60 years ago was this new way of thinking of the relationship between employers and the employee, the company and the community. And it was pretty sort of liberal and positive in many ways for its time. And so they went through the HP way, and the first part of it was profit. And what they said there, I mean, I forgot everything else that I did in that orientation, but they made the point that it seems really crass to have profit as the first point of this philosophy for how the business is going to run. But if you don't profit, everything else goes out the window. And that has stuck with me because as I've been running my business for many years, and as I think about, well, can I really go down in price? Can I do this? Can I do that? At the end of the day, I have to make sure I'm making a profit so that I can, as Chris said, feed my family and so that I can push my business forward. So if you are nervous about having rates that seem extraordinarily high, right, don't forget that you're now the business and you have to take into account not only taxes and all that other stuff, but the risk. The rates will turn out to be higher than you might have thought as a full-timer, but they'll be seen as pretty reasonable, or they should be seen as reasonable by reasonable clients.
Yep. It's so true, too. And people expect to pay a little bit more for freelancers. And if you explain to them, most of them should get it if they have employees, why they're paying a little bit more as opposed to what they would pay for an employee. And sometimes it works out better in their favor this way, and sometimes it doesn't. But, just understanding that really makes a big difference. And the profit thing is kind of critical, isn't it? So another question I get all the time is, I hate selling. I'm not a good salesman.
Then don't go into business for yourself. Well, and that's really part of the business. I mean, you're selling yourself, right? You're a salesperson in anything. Even if you're in your job, you're continually selling yourself that you're of value to the company. So you might not like what you really don't like is the sleazy salesman who knocks on your door and tries to sneak things by on you on the sly, but you are always selling yourself.
But if you do your job that well, then you really don't have to that much because your work speaks for itself.
It's still sales, though.
Yeah.
You're still showing that you provide value. It's just not that sleazy salesman sales. That's what people don't like. I don't want to be that guy I don't want to be that person either, so I don't do it. But you're always proving your value. You are always continuing to sell yourself.
I don't know if I totally agree with that. I mean, if you're in a full-time job,
you're wrong.
And if every year you have a progress report and you can sort of slide by, I mean, maybe you don't care if you're going to get the huge bonus or the medium bonus or no bonus, but if every year they sort of say, okay, well, Higgins, you've done an okay job this year, we're keeping you on. I mean, I guess nowadays the job market is a little tougher and you have to prove yourself, but I feel like it's a different kettle of fish when I'm working on my own, where I really have to sell myself more. I have to go to people who don't know me at all, and I have to tell them, not only is it worth continuing to work with me, but it's worth taking me on at the beginning.
Yeah, I have to come down a little bit closer to what Reuven's saying here. If you're getting referrals and that's where most or all of your business is coming from, then yeah, by all means, I mean, your sales pitch is your client going to a potential client and saying, hey, great work, done by this person, go hire them. But in my experience, I don't get a steady enough stream of referrals to actually count on that. So while that is an important part of the sales process, I do have to go and convince people that I'm worth picking up in the first place. And when you do that, I had a friend and former coworker. He lived over by me and then they moved. But anyway, I worked with him as well. And I was talking to him about freelance and he was saying that he really wanted to try it, but that he couldn't sell. And I started talking to him because he works for a consulting firm in Salt Lake City. And I was like, well, how often do you have to go out and make proposals to the client and stuff like that, convince them to go in a certain direction, to use certain frameworks or tools? And he's like, oh, I do that all the time. And I was like, well, that's selling. The difference is that, when you're selling as a freelancer, eventually you come around to talking about money. You're putting a number on it. And he's like, well, I guess so. I just don't know if I'm comfortable with it. And I just looked at him and I was like, well, is it worth paying for? And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, then why would you be embarrassed to put a number on it? And
no, people are super scared of talking about money. Again, if you're working full-time somewhere, it's a classic thing that people are nervous to go to their bosses and ask for a raise, or they'll just sort of wait around for the annual review and see what they get. I had a guy who was possibly going to work for me about 6 months ago, and it didn't work out in part because I did what I do with all people who work for me, and I'm very transparent, and I show them the proposals I'm going to send to clients. So I showed him the proposal, and I said, I'm going to send this to the client in the morning. And he emailed me back. He said, no, you can't send that. I said, why? He said, because you mentioned money in there. And you can't mention money in a proposal. People don't like talking about money. That gives them a really bad feeling. I explained to him that actually it's sort of expected when I send a proposal to a client, it'll say how much he's going to have to pay. And otherwise, he's going to wonder why I'm wasting his time. And over time, it's taken me a long time to sort of get over the inhibitions of saying to people, this is what I do and this is how much I charge and it's worth it. But now I'm totally comfortable with it. But I definitely remember having funny feelings about the beginning.
Well, and how often do you have a client or potential client come to you and ask you, you start talking about what they need? If you're a good salesperson, you're usually redirecting them to what they need before they ask you how much it costs. But if there's any kind of lull, one of the first two questions that comes up is how much is this going to cost?
Yeah.
I just did that before this call with a client, and I say okay, well, what number sounds expensive? Like if we say $9,000, is that going to be expensive? Is 15 expensive? And they said, well, 15 would be kind of near the top of what we would think would even be reasonable. Okay, that's fine, right? that gets us a ballpark of what kind of field we're playing in anyways, right? If they said, well, I think, 9's really expensive. I did that with another person, it's 3, 6, 9. And they're like, well, 3,000 is really expensive. I was like, okay, well, here's your expectations then. This is what you can do for 3,000 is expensive.
Now, when you're having the money talk, do you guys communicate with that like in email, or do you set up like face-to-face, aka Skype meetings or whatever? Because I think that tends to make a difference on how you can actually sell somebody on the rate. I prefer setting up a quick, Skype 30-minute call, and they get to see me, I get to see them, and it's kind of like, even though they can be in California and I can be in Pennsylvania, establishing that kind of rapport.
Absolutely. I try very hard to avoid putting rates in email, because if I can talk to them on the phone or Skype or even better in person, a gut feeling is it's probably twice, maybe 3 times as likely to succeed. If I just send an email, they're going to say, well, you're very expensive, thanks, but no thanks. But if I talk to them, either I can convince them that the value is worthwhile, or we can often find something that's different than what they originally intended. So there's this web designer here in Modin, where I live in Israel, who contacted me a while ago to do some web programming. And she, like I like to say, nearly fell off her chair when I heard what I could charge. She said, oh, well, I have a programmer who costs way less than that. But we talked for a while, and we talked about what I could do. And so now I'm probably going to be giving her and her employees some lessons on how the web works and web technologies, so that they can do some of the programming themselves, the basic stuff. So there's something where we found something that was mutually good, where I can charge the rate I want, and they can get what they need, and neither of us needs to feel like we're ripping the other one off.
I want to jump in here too and just point out that generally I try and schedule people for calls, and it's not because I feel like it goes better when I have a call, Skype or phone. The difference really is that I get to talk to them, and I understand better what they want. And so then I can cater better to what they need. And I can say, okay, I can give you this and this and this and this and this. I'm capable of providing all of these solutions for all of these different things that you want. And, there's just a better understanding of things. And then when I come to them and I say, this is what it's going to cost, then it's not this, oh my goodness, you put a big number on it, but it's, okay, well, by then they want to work with me. And that's helpful, but for me, I understand whether or not I can help them out. And that high bandwidth communication is really important. And so then if I do have to come and sit down and do an estimate or something, I'll usually say, hey, can I call you in a couple of days and we'll talk over the estimate? But then I can go in and I can say, so here are all the things that I heard you say that you wanted. And, and then I can put a price tag on each of them, or I can talk through what the value is for each of those things. In my opinion, I don't think you're going to need this, but if you do, tell me why, so that we can work this out. And in a lot of cases, not only do we wind up working on stuff together, but the other thing is that in a lot of cases, I'll start explaining to them why they don't need particular things in there, and the estimate will drop by a fair percentage. And so they can actually afford me over the course of the entire project, even though the overall number that was initially on the estimate was something that was beyond what they were willing to spend. And so it really comes down to communication just from the get-go. And that's what pays off for me. That's where it goes, okay, I get what you need, you get what I need, and we have found a way to make it work, and we know that we understand each other.
Yeah, today, before we even started, before we even talked pricing ranges, we talked about how they were going to measure success, what type of success we were looking for. We were saving employee time, right? We were looking for getting people out of support by doing the one feature. I have a whole list of questions that I want to answer for each project. Why are we doing it? What's the problem? How are we going to measure the success? Is it valuable, or is it just a pet project of a manager? And then even for myself internally, are they actually going to see a return on investment? Because there's been a few where that looks cool, but the return on investment is so small that it's just not worth doing it because it costs too much, right? And just tell them up front, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, and I think, my impression also is that potential clients are likely to become actual clients and even long-term clients. It's generally good to be honest and upfront with them, but I think that it's refreshing for them to hear not, oh yes, I will do absolutely everything you want, but you know what? A and B and C are great, and we can do those, and D, E, and F, not such good ideas, or let's do a second stage, or it could be expensive, and they realize that it's a matter of weighing the advantages and disadvantages and not just jumping in and doing everything.
I find out lots of times when you ask how are we going to measure success, they're just like, I don't know. So they don't even know what it's worth, right?
Uh-huh.
They have no idea internally what this new thing they want to build is even worth. They have no idea. It just sounded cool, right? I've seen that with even current clients saying, hey, should we switch everything over to Node from WordPress? I'm like, is it going to make you more money? I don't know. It's the cool thing. Well, great. Is it going to make you more money? I mean, if you can figure a way it's going to make you more money, great.
I get that on Ruby on Rails versus Node as well. And, it's definitely an interesting discussion to have. But, at the same time, what's the real value for you? Why would I do this? And so you talk about the trade-offs. Usually there are trade-offs, and usually they'll care about one thing more than another, and then you can make those decisions. And that'll also help you solidify that why. I think it's Agile or Lean. I think it's Lean that has the 5 whys. So you ask why 5 times to get to the root of what they want.
Yeah, I know today when I started asking my questions, they told me they're talking to a few contractors and they're like, you're the first contractor that's actually asked us about that. They had answers to it all. And they had lots of good metrics they could measure, and they refined a few while we talked, but they said no one else had asked them yet.
Right, and that's super important. I mean, you want to, when you talk to a potential client, you want to show that you're interested in their business, and you want to have questions, and you want to have done your homework. So showing up to a potential client, not having learned anything about who they are, what they do, or the people involved is going to really cause problems. But if you can show interest and show that you actually care about them and you've done your homework, I think can be a big, big plus. They appreciate that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I know they're even suggesting other things, right? So I talked about adding to what we're going to do and like coming up with a better quoting system to save more time of their salespeople so that they can make more sales. And like, we actually have that on like our phase 2 list. We weren't going to talk about it to anyone yet until we had decided if anyone was good. And it's like, and I came up with like, here's like 6 things you should look at for that too. And they said, so they took down like the links I sent them to go look at more features for it as well.
Yep. And they start to feel like you're more of a collaborator and less of just we give you money and you stamp code.
Yeah, I think when I was starting, I was afraid of even talking personally, right? I mean, we talked about our dogs today too, because I heard a dog in the background and they're a dog-friendly workplace. So I was afraid about that not looking professional, and now I just decided I don't care. So occasionally I hear my kid crying outside, and I'll just be like, I work at home.
Yep. So I've got a pick around this, and I guess I'll save it, but I have another question that I get asked a lot, and that is, do I need a business entity, like an LLC or an S-Corp?
Not at first.
Ooh, right. It depends. If you're living in the US, then probably not. If you're not, it can have very serious consequences. For instance, this is one of the first things I discovered when I was moving to Israel and freelancing. So as a US citizen, I owe US taxes no matter where I live in the world. So Israel and the US have a tax treaty, meaning any income tax I pay to Israel is counted as if I paid income tax to the US, and vice versa. The thing is, this is not true for Social Security. So if I were just a freelancer here in Israel and I were getting income into my personal account, I would have to pay both sides of Social Security in the US. But because I set up a business, a corporation, and I get a salary from the corporation, so I don't have to do that. So these are the sorts of little things that when you move abroad can cause trouble, and you just don't need to worry about it otherwise.
Yeah, for me, we don't have LLCs in Canada, but I'm a sole proprietor and I just have a registered business in Canada. So I have like a little business license, pink piece of paper this year that sits on my shelf. No one ever looks at but me.
I just got mine in the mail yesterday, and I just got an 8x10 frame this morning.
Your business license or your
I never even
my
LLC mine ever.
My
LLC. It just sits beside my tape measure.
Mandy LLC. Awesome.
No, DevReps.
Yeah, I know in Canada, when I talk to my accountant, if you're going to make over 150,000 like continually and not just one high year you make that, then it's worth incorporating. So I will do that this year because then I can save a bunch of taxes. And especially if I know a lot of businesses, he says, number one, they don't save their taxes so that I can't pay the government properly at the end of the year, but they take all the money back out of the business. And since I don't ever do that, then I can have money left in the business taxed at a significantly lower rate than I would be taxed personally, because I'd be pushing 43% with my income for next year probably, as opposed to 19% for corporate taxes.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I can really emphasize to people who are going to start freelancing, it is take a percentage of every invoice and put that in a separate bank account because that is your tax money. I almost made that mistake because I'm like, oh, I got all this money, so I can just go spend it. Nope. You people forget you have to pay your taxes.
Yeah, I did that one year and owed the CRA, which is like the IRS, $9,000. This year, the last few years, I've saved plenty extra, so I get my tax bill and I was like, sweet, I have $10,000 I don't have to send the government that is now
that's
my bank account.
What happened to me, and I was very, very, very happy about that.
Yep.
I know talking to my accountant, who I've had for 10 years, though, he always laughs and he's like, you're like the only person that ever tells me that. All of my other small businesses that I work with, they always go, what? I owe the government how much? And they've like taken everything and spent it all year. I was like, really? Like, that's just my tax savings that I have extra, plus I have savings.
Big mistake.
Yeah, one thing that I want to point out with this is, so my dad's a dentist, which means that he has a small business here in the U.S. I guess you can be an employee and dentist anyway, but he's like his own office dentist, and he runs his business as a DBA, which is doing business as, which means that he's personally liable if something happens, though he's renting the space so that the space has insurance that way, and he carries malpractice insurance, which he's never had to use, to cover him that way. So certain professionals have different degrees of risk that way. But if you have an LLC and somebody comes after you for something you did or didn't do, it is kind of nice to have that liability stop at the business. One other thing that I want to point out is that related to this is that you need a separate bank account for your business.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because A, it's easier to track expenses to the business that way, as opposed to running it all out of your personal account. And it also makes it easier for your accounting software to figure a lot of that stuff out. So
in Canada, if you mix your money too, then you can cross-contaminate your liability if you mix your money. So you got to be careful about that as well.
Yeah, but if you're a sole proprietor, you've done that anyway.
Is very similar to an LLC, I understand.
So I have horror stories on both of those fronts. Number one, I would say, and maybe this is just a paranoid Israel thing, but not only should you have a separate bank account from your business, but you should have it in a separate bank. I had both accounts, my company account and my personal account, in the same bank, in the same branch here in Israel. And they would basically see them as, oh, this is just sort of two accounts that Reuven owns. And so if I went into overdraft in one of them, then they'd be like, oh, that's fine because you've got the other one. And when I would negotiate with them over things, over getting loans or whatever, they would look at both of them together. And having them in separate banks with separate bankers where there's this very clear wall between them, it has been very helpful and very useful, giving me a lot of peace of mind. This is something that a business manager of mine years ago insisted on, and she was 100% right.
I went and registered mine as a business, like with my business account. Although in Canada, legally as a sole proprietor, I can register it under my own name, and that's still fine. But it's with the same bank, but registered as my business's name account, not my name.
Oh, it was registered under my business as well, but they didn't care.
Seems shady to me, but
it was
yeah, I don't have that problem. Both
he's got a business account and a personal. Let's just overdraft both of them. Whatever. That just seems weird.
Yeah, I'm not even going to get into my bank. I hate those people.
All banks suck. PNC sucks less for me than most other ones. But yeah, I've had a ton of bank horror stories too.
I just keep all my money under my mattress.
There you go.
What was your address again?
In bitcoins. In bitcoins under the mattress.
In bitcoins too.
Yeah.
Virtual mattress. I'll tell you the other horror story I had was, at least in Israel, when you sign up for a corporate account. And yes, I've got a corporation, limited liability, and all that other stuff. So one of the many forms I had to sign said that, yes, it's a corporate account, and if the corporation owes money and cannot pay from the account, I, as the owner of the company, am personally liable.
Oh, geez. So what's the point, right?
Right. So basically the bank, and this is why banks are so profitable, right? Like, they don't want to be left holding the bag. So if my company declares bankruptcy, they'll be like, that's fine. Reuven's good for it, right? He's got a house we can force him to sell. Now, I will say that my company bank, I mean, they're a big bank in Israel, Bank Leumi, and I must say the people who work there are super, super nice and helpful to me. And it's been a shocker, A, because I've never experienced that sort of service anywhere, and B, Israeli banks are especially known for having terrible service. But for the times when I've needed them, it's been great to be able to call them on the phone. They know who I am. And so banking, being the big fish in a small pond, or like a well-known customer in a small bank branch, I found has been very, very helpful and useful.
So one thing that I want to just point out with this, as far as should I have a business entity, is none of us are attorneys, none of us are accountants, and you should go talk to one and make sure you understand what what it gains you and what some of the hoops you're going to have to jump through are, because it varies from state to state and from country to country, and there's just not a good way for us to answer that. We're just talking about our experience and some of the things that we have gotten from or suffered through for having a setup the way we do it.
But if it's
so don't sue the podcast.
Yeah, but if you're in the U.S. and it's not like December, then don't let this stop you from freelancing.
Yeah.
You can figure that stuff out.
Oh, absolutely. But I just want to point out, go talk to an accountant, go talk to an attorney. The talk that I gave at Utah Code Camp, I have 2 slides, and one says, do I need an accountant or an attorney? And then the next slide says yes, and then I just move right along. Because
just last week, my accountant saved me $3,000 in taxes because I can income split with my wife because she does do stuff in the business and doesn't work otherwise. So it was totally worth my fees. The fees,
right? And they'll not, an accountant and or attorney will not, especially accountant, will not only know how to structure things for your tax benefits, but they keep up on the laws having to do with this, and the laws are constantly changing. And there's just no way that you want to or that you can keep up with it yourself. I mean, similarly, like what Curtis said, there was just some ruling in Israel in the last 6 months, 8 months about when spouses both work for the same company and how the taxes work, and it had a major impact on us. But I never would have known about it except for maybe a headline in the newspaper and what to do about it.
Yeah, but they can talk to you about all the things you can write off and how you need to track it and all the games you have to play in order to not pay the government quite as much money. But beyond that, the other thing that I've seen accountants and attorneys really pay off on is if you're looking at investing in something or, buying another business or something like that, or if somebody's looking to buy you out or buy something that you've built or made or, whatever, somebody wants to buy a product that you've built from you, like the intellectual property and stuff, these guys can save you a ton of hassle on that stuff. And if they don't do that kind of thing personally, they know somebody who does, and they can either talk to them for you or put you in touch so that you can save yourself a ton of hassle. So if you need any kind of advice about any weird stuff with your business, these are the people you got to be going to. So you want these advisors in your business. It just makes a ton of difference, and not just for the tax savings that you can get by knowing them.
Yeah, I've used the same guy for 12 years now, and he's always been good. Some things we've double-checked. We have another friend who's an accountant, and we've double-checked with him that we were getting correct advice, just to double-check, not because we didn't trust him, but other than that, go to the same guy for 10 years, 12 years.
Yep. Any other common things that you guys run across when you talk to people about going freelance?
I think one of the ones is they want to talk about their pricing and not a lot about budgeting. They always think they can out-earn what they have, which is pretty common in general in the world. And I know even from a post I've written, the post about budgeting see about 1/10 of the traffic is the posts about better pricing.
Yep. Well, if you make more money and you're not good at budgeting, you're probably just going to wind up spending more money, right?
Yeah, you can never out-earn your spending if you have bad spending habits.
Interesting. We talked plenty about Dave Ramsey a couple of episodes ago. What were you going to say, River?
Yeah, if you want to know what I'm going to say, then you should go read his book, and that'll say pretty much the same thing.
Predict what Curtis is going to say by channeling Dave Ramsey.
So I'm a little bit curious, Mandy. Has your experience going freelance or independent or whatever you want to call it, does it square up with our experience? I know you've listened to pretty much every episode of the show multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from this podcast. Like I said, I was fearing talking to an accountant for about a year, and they are not scary people, it turns out. They want to help you. But as long as you are taking percentages of invoices and setting that money aside, once you do go see your accountant, you'll be fine. And like I also said, it's all about reputation and respect and just putting your name out there and proving to people that you are somebody that they want to work with. And other than that, yeah, everything pretty much squares up.
Cool. Well, if your experience is different and you're a freelancer, or if you have any other questions, then by all means let us know. We still have the user voice set up on the podcast website. We're going to be changing that soon, but for the meantime, I think that's the best way. I also want to point out before we get to the picks that we have a forum that you can sign up for if you go to the website. That's freelancershow.com, and you can misspell it a couple of different ways because I bought all those domains. If you go to freelancershow.com and click on the forum tab, it'll take you to the place where you can sign up for the forum, and then you can ask all of those questions there too. The forum is a paid forum, but we basically just charge enough to keep the trolls out, and that way we don't have to police it as heavily. In fact, using this system, we haven't had to kick anybody out of any of the forums that we run for our shows. So it works out real nice, and it's also a good way to help the show. But the lowest cost one is what, $10 a year or something? You know, you can get in, you're not paying a lot, and really it is just to create a great place where you can come and contribute and ask your questions. So you can do that. And Reuben pointed out in the back channel that it's a business expense. So yeah, save tax money now. All right, should we get to the picks?
Sure.
Reuben, do you want to start us with picks?
Sure thing. So I got 3 picks. I guess in the wake of our discussion of starting freelancing and banks and everything, so the bank in the U.S. that I'm using is Ally Bank, which was set up from the whole GM bankruptcy and so forth. And given that I live outside the U.S., I need to have a U.S. bank account. I need to be internet accessible. And I found them to be super out of the way. Like, I have very simple needs. I just need to deposit money, withdraw money, pay some bills from my U.S. account. Super, super, super easy. And on the very rare occasions when I've needed to deal with them on the phone, they've been great. Second pick is a book that I just read called 90% of Everything, which is about the shipping industry worldwide and how, well, basically 90% of everything we use came on a ship, and that it's ridiculously cheap to ship things. So cheap, in fact, that apparently filleted fish in Scotland is caught in Scotland, shipped to China, filleted there, and shipped back. And it's still cheaper than filleting it in Scotland. And this reporter basically went and spent some time on a ship and with the shipping industry and talks about pirates. Fascinating, fascinating stuff if you want to hear and learn about how stuff is moved around the world. And the third pick is a fun one, I would say for the kids, but really it's for all of us. It's called Eleco Extreme, or the Extreme Electronics Kit. Some of the older folks like me might remember electronics kits from when we were little, where they had these springs and wires, and you would bend the spring back and put the wire into it and then connect different parts. So Eleco has figured out that that was really a pain and it tended to break. So they have these different kits, and the Extreme one is the large one, but they come together with snaps like you would have on your clothing. And so you can just snap together the different pieces and light bulbs and LEDs and resistors. And I brought it back from the US when I came back from a trip a few days ago. And my 8-year-old has been working with it nonstop, and he just is totally, totally overjoyed. And we've been doing some of the projects together. So great, great fun, and a good reminder of some of the basic electronics I learned in college, which I never really applied because I'm a software guy. So anyway, those are my picks for this week.
Awesome. Mandy, what are your picks?
Well, I am officially moving again, this time into a house, and I was fortunate enough to find a home that is a dome. And so I did a lot of research on monolithic home design, and it is super, super cool. It looks like a turtle shell, and it's so, so, so cool. Also, because we're moving out to a very, very, very remote location into the country, wooded area, beautiful, gorgeous, but the problem is we have no idea where anything is. So I found this app on my iPhone called Around Me, and it'll tell you the closest grocery store, the closest bar, the closest church. It'll tell you all that kind of stuff, and it'll take you and show you how many miles away it is. And so we just sat there outside our home and just kind of looked and saw where things would be, and so we can sort of start to get our bearings because we're moving about 150 miles away. So those are my picks.
Awesome. Curtis, what are your picks?
I pick one article by my friend Morton. It's called The Value of Time. It's about charging what you're worth, and even some formulas about how to charge what you're worth.
Jeff, what are your picks?
Mine are not very business friendly this week, but I have 2. One is an Alfred workflow for Spotify. to search tracks, albums, artists, stop and start, fast forward, all that stuff. And the other is this site called Lavish Bootstrap, and you pick a photo or upload a photo, and it picks out the major colors and can generate a Bootstrap theme out of that. So I don't know how useful it is, but it's fun to play with. Those are mine.
Cool. I've got 3 picks. They're all books. And if you're looking to go freelance, these are books that you should go pick up. The first one is Platform by Michael Hyatt. It basically explains to you how to build a platform using social media, email, you name it. It kind of walks through all of that. It's a really terrific book. The next book I'm going to pick is To Sell is Human. If you have any doubts about whether or not you should be a salesperson, or you have some qualms about talking to people about, how much you're going to charge them and stuff like that, To Sell is Human is a terrific book that just kind of walks through, hey, look, this is something that you do naturally anyway. People expect you to act a certain way, and, it's just kind of a natural part of being a person. And then the last one is Eric's book, 30 Days to Become a Freelancer. I don't know that he's plugged it a ton on the show, but it's got a whole bunch of exercises that you can go through to become a freelancer. And so it kind of gets you set up and helps you think about, why do I want to be freelance, and, what kind of freelancing should I do and stuff like that. Terrific book. So I'm going to pick those. And finally, just as a gee whiz, something that I've been listening to on Audible, it's called Hatching Twitter. And it's the story about how Twitter kind of came to be what it is now. And it's really interesting, all of the different people that were involved in it coming about, and the things that they agreed on and the things that they didn't agree on, and how Twitter kind of took on a life of its own and became something beyond what they really kind of envisioned it to be. And anyway, it's been a really, really interesting book to listen to. And so I'll pick that one as well. And those are the picks. So we'll wrap up. Go sign up for our forum. And thanks for listening. We'll catch y'all next week.
Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more. Would you like to join a conversation with the Freelancer Show panelists and their guests? Want to support the show? We have the form that allows you to join the conversation and support the show at the same time. Sign up at freelancershow.com/forum.